Hello, and welcome to another Unreal Engine video. And welcome if you're new here. Thanks for joining. You're coming back. Now, today, I think we're just going to do some improvements on the stat manager component. So I'm thinking like some slight updates to the stat object. Because right now we're multicasting the entire map, right? And so if you have a large stat system, that's going to be a lot of data that you're broadcasting. Well, there's another way we can do this as well, and that is with rep notifies. So rep notifies basically does a multicast for you, but without actually needing to implement it yourself. So instead here of when we do this multicast and we set this entire map, we're just going to delete this. We'll just remove this right here where we do all the updates, right? Because who cares? We're going to do a rep notify over on the stat base. So after that's deleted, we'll go over to the stat base type. And we're going to set this value, the current value that we're updating, right, to rep notify. And what this is going to do is it'll automatically like change these sets to a set with notify. It'll create this on rep value, which will be called both server and client side. So you can check to see if your value was replicated. And basically all this rep notify does is it just does a multicast of this variable update. So whenever you change this value, it will multicast out the update. So on this example, I changed it over to the value. So we'll remove this multicast. We'll change this value to rep notify. And then we get this on rep value function automatically created. We can see this if I wanted to do this max value. For example, we can do rep notify, and it'll create this rep notify max value. So whenever the max value changes, this will get called. Whenever this value is changed, this value will get called. So on this on rep value, I added a simple print statement. So we can now see that the value we'll just print out the value, right? So when that happens, so now whenever the value gets updated through our on the server side, the value will get updated. The value will now be automatically rep notified to broadcast that value update out to all the clients. So now when we see the example here, switching that over, now we only really need to go from server side, which is nice. You can see we get initialized with stuff on all the clients. And now when we hit, we can get value on both clients. Of course, the and the other abilities work too. Let me change that so we can actually see those values changing here just for a second. Let's see, damage. Let's see, so we're hitting here, right? That's that. And then in the ability, do a -5 here, just to make it a little bit of a better example. So our stats are initialized because those are all the stats for, right? Because all of our update stats are getting updated to 100. So both our energy and health is being initialized on both clients. So there's like a prints out a bunch of times. But you'll see, and you can see on both clients that our value whenever we shoot a projectile is going down. And whenever we deal damage, it gets broadcasted out automatically. So instead of multicasting the entire map, we now just multicast each individual values, and we can have the ability to send a notify back to the stat manager component to notify whenever there was a level up. Now, of course, our next steps, right? We're going to be doing a experience level up for each one of these stats, which is kind of what I like, personally speaking. I like that you can do like level ups, like each individual stat has its own experience and each one has its own level. I like that. So as you guessed, or as you could figure, we make all these variables rep notify because we want to just keep track of those whenever they update. And of course, now this gives us options. We can now go to this on level. We can notify. We can actually save our stat manager reference, and on a notify here, we can notify the player of a level up, and we can do something like call something in our stat manager or do something like that, which is nice. Okay, let's go and do the level up in the stat manager, I think. I think in order to start, we're gonna need to change some things because we want to apply experience really whenever, right? Whenever we use or make a change for stats, we might want to do experience modifiers, right? So I'm thinking we're gonna need a structure. And basically, this is going to be kind of similar to how we had the ability structure. I mean, you see how we had the ability cost, we had this, and then it had like 5. Well, what I'm thinking is we have a structure, but we have 2 of those instead. So one is for the stat modifiers, which in this case would be like the stat ability cost here, right? So this what I'm calling the stat manager change request, because that's kind of what you're doing. You want to change these stats, but that and then add experience to these stats, right? So it's kind of like a change request type of thing, like, hey, I request these changes. So this will probably have the ability will have to update here for this new structure. And I'm thinking we're gonna have to update this update stats instead and take in this structure. So let me go test these changes out and see. And this should be good to go. Okay, you know what? Change of plan. I'm making I'm making this name smaller. All right, with that name changed, I'm gonna rename it to stat modifiers. Change request was just way too long. So with this change, the interface changed, right, on our component. We can now pass in that stat modifiers brand new structure here with our stat modifiers and our experience modifiers. And now we just pass it. Now instead of passing it to what we were doing before, which was looping through each one of the individual keys. What I did was I converted that intersection to a macro, the stat for loop, basically. And so this is just going to loop through the keys and then return the key for this stat that we need to update and what the value is. So this macro, when I collapsed it, you can see it goes through the keys. Does the for loop, takes that, and then this is where that funky and is, even though this bottom one's always gonna be true. So, but yeah, so it'll just return that key of the one that we need to change by how much we need to change it by. And of course, this is attached to a for loop, so this macro will run in a for loop. So over on the here, we know that this will be updated through a for loop. So we'll be able to update those. And then it'll be the same thing for the experience. When we break it off, we have the experience now. So we'll do this macro, which will now give us the keys that we need to add experience. So we need to create an interface call for adding experience and doing the level up. And then we'll need to have to fix the abilities and things like that that are downstream from this, because this is now a structure instead of a simple map. All right. Let's go create this interface call and let's do some experience. Okay, so over in our stat type object, we're going to do an add experience. And it's going to look similar to how we did the update current value, but the add experience, we're obviously going to be doing a bit more functionality in the end. So let's go ahead and add this now to this. So we can just add experience. And now it doesn't matter what the object, how it calculates this experience. It will just simply say, hey, from the stat modifiers, I need to add some experience. Here you go. So now the object itself on the other side can control how the experience scaling is going to work, and we're just going to implement a simple experience scaling and level up system. That's it. Okay, so now over in the stat base, right, we want to do the add experience. So here on our first step, what we're going to do for simple experience system, we're just going to add our experiences together, add the new amount, set it, and since it's rep notified, that'll automatically be replicated. We can say we're checking here if it's less than the next level experience. If it is, we're going to return the experience, the new experience. If it's not, we're going to increment our level, set our level, and then we're going to do a quick next level experience, which in this case, for testing purposes, will just be a level times 100. for the next experience. We'll then wrap this around and we'll recheck the next level experience with the experience. And that should be good to go. Right. Yeah, because if it'll wrap right back around. If the next level is good, it'll be fine and it'll just return the experience. And all right, next step would be to go back into our stat user, because now this is where we're doing individual stat modifications. We're going to swap this out for our new stat modifier and break a whole bunch of things in the process. But that's okay. So we'll refix this because we're converting it over to a two-stat system with experience instead of just the individual ones. In our player character now, where we have the stat user, we have changed the interface now. We need to change this over to the stat modifiers instead of these individual ones. So now when I update the stats, we're passing in the stat modifier structure. From the damage now, right? Damage and abilities will now be able to pass in the stat modifier struct. In our damage properties data, the next here, we're going to swap this over to the structure. We're going to break a whole bunch of things in the process, but that is a-okay because what we're actually breaking is not really that much of an issue. Let's go into the ability data. Let's do the same thing. Now we'll just go fix these abilities right here because now this is broken, but we have the stat modifiers, which we can just replace this pin with, basically. I mean, we're just replacing pins. That's all we're doing here. And one quick restart later, we have our stat modifiers with our regular stat modifier. Okay, maybe I should rename this to ability stat modifiers. But we have our stat modifiers, stat experience modifiers, and we have our ones on our damage as well. Now we can go ahead and implement this, and I'll replace these because they deleted the old value. We'll also need to just do a quick update for the ability data here in the action component to just pass in the stat modifiers instead of where we're doing that single map. We're now passing in the struct. I'm going to make a small change here, and instead of passing into a level times 100, I'm going to take the previous level of experience and I'm just going to multiply it by 2.5. Just to make it easy on myself, because multiplying it by 100, I realized that the numbers just don't scale very well. So, all right, now that we're modifying the experience in the stat manager, right? We're adding the experience. We're gonna add some. Oh, I went through and added some print strings, so we can see now level, and then it'll just print out the string. And I did that for experience, the next level experience, and then the current value. I completely forgot about doing max value, but I'm sure you could figure it out based on what we've been doing so far. But yeah, so now in the data asset, right, we have the ability, and this ability now is updated. I renamed it to ability stat modifiers just to make it a little more sense. So now this has stat modifiers, energy. It modifies it by 10. And then the stat experience modifiers will modify it by 50. So this will add 50 experience. For the damage, you can see here I changed it to damage stat modifiers. And this is now just health minus 10 and your experience. So this will actually apply experience when you take damage. That sounds like a pretty good okay. That sounds pretty fun, right? So that'll do that. So now we can see that in action here. We can see that whenever I press an ability, it'll pop up 50, 90, next level 11. I did set the next level experience default to 100, so that's why it's at that. So now if we go up to, there you go, 625 is our next level for level 3. We'll go up. And we're increasing. We're almost there. We're almost to level 3. This must be a Dark Souls game. There we go. We're at level 3. Fantastic. And let's see. What am I doing here? Oh wait. Yeah, I want to see some damage. Let's see. Take some damage. There you go. And then they took damage. And they gained experience. Nice. Now we don't have checks for abilities again, like I said, but that's fine. You know, I've come to the conclusion that networking is actually not that hard. And the reason I say that is because if you take a look at this component, this is what I actually got it cut down to. We're not even needing any replication because, and I say that because we multicast everything. We multicast all of our updates. And then it works. Right? Because multicasting is running on the server and the clients. So if we need to keep stats in sync with the server and the client, we'll need to be multicasting that stuff. So we won't actually be doing any of that here. In fact, we won't have to do most of it. So the update stats now here, right? Stat modifications. I have a get stats. I did add one of those just to return these stats for testing purposes. So the do stat modifications, it's a little bit more complicated than what it was before, but basically this just holds, it copies it to a local variable, does the updates on the local variable, and then that's it, updates it. So that's what that does. The initialization is the same here. It just takes in the object and initializes it, and then adds it. So this was just collapsed to a function, no big deal. Now the reason I say the multicast thing, because we technically can execute these things in parallel. Because on the event notifier, remember, we did put a switch with authority on this action because this is the one that triggers off the montage. However, if we remove that, it now executes on server side and client side. So now, when this action component fires off this action ability, right? Component's action ability. We can check the switch here, right? So we switch it here. We multicast it because we only want to filter out the server. And so we send this call to the clients, right? What this will do. So this multicast call will send it to the clients, filtering it out off this switch. And this will go through and it'll just do the stat modification, right? So this will just multicast this call of doing the stat modifications. Now we do have to have a switch of authority here because spawning this actor, this damage actor, is going to be happening on server side. So that happens server side. But the stat modifications here forward, all this stuff happens multicasted. So we do the stat updates on both the client and the server side. There's also another place I had to update this, and it's no surprise this was also another server call here. This is actually in the health component itself, the one that actually spawns in our damage actor. So this should look familiar to what I just said. I went over. So in our character, we have this for action component, we have this for our health component, we have this for our stat manager component. So now in the health component, we had to change. I had to go through and change this to multicast call. And then that does all these updates, right? That does all this damage stuff. And then it spawns the damage actor, right? On the client side too, because you want this damage actor to be doing damage on the client side as well. And so it'll go through, initialize it, and then activate. Now, one of the reasons that the networking has become so easy for me is because I've learned that if you're debugging something, so let's say we're in this action component and we're activating this ability, and we're multicasting this call off of this filtered basically filtered server call. If we were to add a breakpoint here, we can hit play. Now this is a little bit of a preview of what's coming up, but if we press 1 and we cast our ability, we can see here it says server simulating. And if we hover over, I mean, you got to try and find some debug data here, but you can see what type of data that comes through. So you know that the server now is being updated with this type data. So at this point, this is what the server has in its data. Now, if I hit play again, we'll see it has now changed to the client. So now it is client simulating. Now, if we hover over these, you can see that this is the client side data. Now, if you come across a case where this is not there, for example, then you might be looking at a multicast call or some variable down your chain. For example, this action data at some point was not being multicasted. So when I change this over to multicasted now, if I go and when I set this, right, we had this set this now. We trigger this interaction component. This is our this is in our actual trigger. Now this is when we do the montage. When we set up this action data, we just multicast that set. Now we have it on the client side, and we can debug through our stats. So at any point where it is either the server or the client is coming back as not the data that you want when you hover over it, you might be missing either a multicast call or a server call. So now that's why I'm thinking networking has become actually kind of easy, at least for myself. And at least looking at it that way, I think it's much easier to understand when you can debug the breakpoints and see, okay, I'm on server side, this data that's coming through, then I know that it's on the server side. But if this data, for example, this ability modifiers at one point when I was debugging was actually empty, and it was actually client side. So that's why I was like wondering, why was this happening? And so I just started swapping out calls for multicast calls and servers, and then eventually I realized that like I was doing some of these switches this switch was in the wrong place because I didn't want to do it on the component. I want to do it inside the component to filter through the server call. Okay, so now it's time for the piece de resistance. How do you do the HUD, right? Now, before we do the HUD, before we take a look at how I put together like the super basic HUD, um, don't laugh. I attempted to interface widgets. Why? I don't know. So anyways, we had this HUD widget. It has an interface with it because why not? So this just has the as. It has an update stat, which takes in the e stat. So this just takes in our stats basically. This update stat interface. So in the actual widget here, we have a blank canvas panel and a stats box. And this is a scroll box actually. And you can see the dimensions here. Now in the graph, we take that HUD widget, update state stats here. We're gonna just loop through the stats that we get through. And this might look a little familiar because we're querying, we're gonna save a local map, but this is not, this stats widgets are actually widget interfaces that I put on stats because it just sounds funny to use widget interfaces. I've never even heard of that, but hey, it works. Right, so we go through the stat types, right? The enums with the stat types, we go through those keys. we check to see if it's in our current one, in our current widget here. And if it's not, then we're going to go ahead and create this stat widget. So the class of stat widget here, which is our other one. We'll add the child to the stats box that we set up in the here. We set this as the variable. We'll add the child. We will cast this stats widget to as a stats widget. So as the interface call here, and we will add it to this map, stats widgets. So these are a collection of the keys that are going to be our stats, with the values being widget interfaces here for our stats. And so yeah, if we already have it, if the stat already exists in the stat widgets now, we're just going to go ahead and just update it with the new stat type. So these stat widgets basically will take in a stat type, and then off of that stat type, it will construct the widget, basically. So off of that HUD, that's what we'll do here for the HUD widget. Yeah, no, it looks a little funny, but it kind of works out really well because it the code looks pretty neat. And so now in the widget stat, right, we have an update stat. This takes in your stat type. You got your as. Now in the widget stat, in the actual widget, it looks like this. So I added a text box here with level, two text box actually. These are just side by side, basically. A progress bar in the middle. And on the bottom, there's the current amount, and then there's another text with a slash, and then the max amount here. But that's pretty simple. I mean, you can just put that together real quickly, but the important part is the graph now. So the values here all have bindings created with them. So you can create bindings here. So that'll update that value. They'll create those bindings over here. And from over here, we can actually just save it, because the interface call here is just an update. So it's just a set. So what we'll do is, the reason for those accessors now is in the widgets. Well, this is just, okay, that name is just the level here. But if we have the actual level, we can see that type, just get the level and pass it to the widget. And so we just basically do that all of them. The experience bar is just a simple division of your current experience. I think this is a little off because the widget doesn't work perfectly, but it's fine. It's weird. I don't know. But anyways, the object that it holds here, we have these accessors. We can just set up the widgets here now, right? Our widget values. So this is our HUD widget is our collection of values, right? And then now in the actual HUD thingamajig here, what we do is on the begin play, we create our W HUD, so our main HUD here. We set it, we pass it as the interface, and then we save the reference, and then we add it to the viewport. And now this HUD here, the actual BP HUD, on the interface call here, we have a HUD update stat, and this is just going to pass through the stats. Again, the eStat, the stat type. And so that's all this will do, is this will pass it to that widget HUD. It'll pass it those list of stats to update here. And now to finish it all off, we on the tick for our player controller, what we'll do is we'll query the stats manager off the stats user. We'll grab the stats and we'll pass it into the HUD. Now this HUD variable is actually saved as the interface here for the HUD. And you can actually do that in the player controller by just get HUD here and then just set it. So once that's set up, we can now see if I removed all the breakpoints, we have 2 players. They're both initialized with 2 stats. And whenever we use these abilities, we can see, oh look, I gained experience. I used some mana. So the bottom is energy. So I'm now at 90 of 100. I'm now at 80 of 100. I leveled up there. I'm now level 1. We're using mana quite often. Okay, there's energy. We're up to level 2. Now we're up to 40. Now, before I do anything, let's see. What do you think will happen with the damage? Predictions? Have you been paying attention? Look at that. And look at that on the other screen too. You can see that they took damage at 97.5 out of 100. And they actually gained some experience from taking damage. So they'll take damage more, gain some more experience, level up, and you can see that all the stats are nice and replicated. Well, that was a bit of a complicated system, but I hope you understood it. Well, thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.